بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب لله من سيئات أعمالنا ونستهديه ونسترضيه فإنه من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل الله فلا هادي له ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على محمد النبي الخاتم الأمين وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah for having given us the blessing of Islam, the blessing of faith and meaning and purpose, the faith that teaches us that life does have meaning and does have a purpose, and that life is anchored on the aspirational principle of justice, that in fact justice and beauty and mercy and compassion are divinity in itself. It is impossible to pursue justice, beauty, mercy, compassion without pursuing the divine. In the achievement of justice is the manifestation of divinity on this earth. And to be with Allah, to be with God, to ally oneself with God, must necessarily mean that you ally yourself with the principle of justice and the principle of beauty. If you believe that you know God, or that you pursue God, or that you seek God, but God for you does not materialize into a solid normative principle and aspiration, the solid normative principles of justice and beauty, then in fact your quest, your path is in vain, because God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, can only be accessed through justice, beauty, mercy, and compassion. We are all taught, and we recite in our prayers every rak'ah, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, the straight path. It is no small thing that we repeat this prayer, the Fatiha Quran, the very first surah in the Quran. We repeat it in every prayer. We repeat it when we celebrate something. We repeat it when we mourn something. We repeat it in every occasion. And the Fatiha itself, if you reflect upon it, unfolds, sets out everything that we Muslims are supposed to be about. إياك نعبد, we worship you, وإياك نستعين, we seek your help. to live life without God's help is arrogant and self-centered and easily leads to self-indulgence. And in our prayer, the Fatiha, the first surah in the Quran, we consistently pray Allah to guide us to the straight path, al-siratal al-Mustaqim. The straight path cannot be simply attained by reading text. The straight path is the path of divinity. And divinity, the divine, gave us the revealed text, gave us the historical text, the revealed text, the Quran. The historical text is the collective, preserved memories of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions and the family of the Prophet and the successors of the Prophet. That was also given to us. But it is not just the revealed text and the historical text, but God also gave us our rational beings, our intellects, and gave us an encoded, intuitive sense about beauty, justice, and in fact, the very laws of creation which teach a toddler that hunger leads to crying, pain leads to crying, loneliness leads to crying, isolation leads to crying, destitution leads to crying, anxiety and fear leads to crying. All of this a toddler knows from day one. And a toddler associates all of that with ugliness. When we pray to Allah, ihdina al-siratal mustaqim, grant us the straight path, in many ways, we are begging Allah to save us from the obfuscations and deceptions of adulthood. As we grow older, we start to intellectualize and to interrogate our intuitive sense and to deconstruct our intuitive sense and to develop highly artificial, even if sometimes very sophisticated, but artificial nevertheless, senses of false beauty. If we really want to know what the al-siratal mustaqim is, yes, we go to the revealed text, yes, we go to the historical text, but we also go to that simple intuitive lesson that Allah teaches us with every child and every animal born on the face of this earth. It's an education. You watch animals that were created with Allah's instinct in them, and you learn a great deal about the al-siratal mustaqim. You watch a toddler just born. If you just watch a toddler and your soul is pure and purified, you immediately learn without much intellectual rigor that safety, security is beautiful. It's husn. Because that's what makes a toddler happy. That if you watch a toddler, that every human being has a right to food and a right not to be hungry. That every human being has a right to familial relations and to tenderness and affection. Because a toddler, if these are withdrawn, that has grave, if you withdraw affection and security and safety from a toddler, that has grave consequences. It is remarkable when we say we thank Allah for the ni'mah, for the blessing of Islam. We don't often reflect upon all the power that entails. All the power that entails. It is not simply the performance of rituals. It is rather elementary in every qaida, in every maxim of theology, leave alone law, that it is not actions, it's not the performance of acts that can fulfill the meaning of a thing, but it is rather actions combined with the right intention and combined with the right comprehension. So it is not the fact that we repeat in prayer every rak'ah the Fatiha and we say ihdina al-siratal Mustaqim. If you repeat it but you don't reflect on it, ponder it, it's not going to do much for you. Then it's just repetition. Then it's just words. But if we reflect on it, when we say ihdina al-siratal Mustaqim, the straight path, we are saying so much. We are saying so much. The straight path that we ask Allah and we pray to Allah to help us adhere to, again, is the path of justice, beauty. In other words, put it differently, it is the path of istikhlaf. It is the path of the special relationship we inherited from Allah, or that we undertook from Allah when we inherited the earth. When Allah tells us, I have istakhlaftukum fil ard, that I've made you deputies and viceroys and agents on this earth, and Allah commands us أن لا نفسد فيها, not to corrupt, not to cause corruption. And we balance that with ihdina al-siratal Mustaqim. And we could stand before Allah and say, Allah, I'm no great philosopher. I can't go and read the books of philosophy and develop a systematic intellectual critique of existentialism to know what is al-siratal Mustaqim. So Allah, what do I do? And the answer is quite simple. I've already told you there's a straight path. I've already told you repeatedly in the Quran various characteristics of the straight path. Allah doesn't love the hypocrites. Allah doesn't love liars. Allah doesn't love miserliness, stingy people. Allah doesn't love the cruel. Allah doesn't love the unjust. I've already given you so many indications as to what the straight path entails. But beyond that, I've also given you an intellect and an intuition. And if you stop philosophizing and just watch what I encoded innately and intuitively into all human beings, you will know what the nature of the justice that defines the straight path is. safety, security, fulfillment, happiness are all things that every human being of every race, color, religion, gender covets. And in fact, when we attempt to describe a psychopath, we always refer to these basic concepts. When we say that someone is antisocial in a psychopathic way, what we mean is that the normal intuitive things that appeal to normal human beings does not appeal to this individual because this individual can't feel empathy, for instance. What does that tell us? It tells us what the Quran already told us, what the Prophet ﷺ already told us, that if you want to be a beautiful human being, be a person ala khuluq, be an empathetic human being. Be a person who loves for others what he or she would love for themselves. It is important to remember these basic, foundational, and critical principles, especially in our time. And I'll talk about why especially in our time. If we are going to be very frank and honest with each other, we Muslims, wherever we turn, we find so much disappointment at the way that Muslims have let down not just other Muslims, but even betrayed themselves. We find it wherever we turn. And that's difficult. To give concrete examples, I already spoke about this at the beginning of the last halaqah this past Saturday. But in my opinion, this is one of those critical turning points in our history, in the history of Islam, and one of those critical historical moments that will define us and our generations for many years to come. Last halaqah, Saturday, I think it was this past Saturday, I talked about the letter signed by 37 countries, basically giving support to the Chinese government in the way that the Chinese government is dealing with the Uyghur Muslims, especially, but not limited to, the Xinjiang province in China. China now for years has had a concentration camp, what it calls a re-education camp, where it holds Muslims, and as I mentioned before, among the many problems with these quote-unquote re-education camps, again in reality concentration camps, is that there is a thriving organ trade in human organs from people that are executed by the Chinese government, and their organs are harvested and sold. In a previous khutbah, I talked about the statistical fact that the biggest customer for human organs from China is Saudi Arabia, not the government, but Saudi consumers, people who need the kidney, need the liver, need a heart, need whatever. I've also indicated that there are a number of books, academic books, written on this subject, and you can easily find these books and read them for yourself. The re-education camps have a long list of horrendous human rights abuses in which Muslims are not allowed to pray, to worship, to read Quran, to fast Ramadan, and re-educating them basically means in order to be good Chinese citizens, you have to relinquish everything Islamic, including the language of that province in China, and centuries-old habits and cultures, and everything that has to do with Islamic theology and practice. So what happened basically is that recently 22 countries, European countries, signed a letter addressed to the Human Rights Council, especially the High Commissioner for Human Rights, demanding that the Human Rights Council investigate these concentration camps because of the so many reports about the horrendous conditions and the horrendous abuses. Basically, China wants to eradicate Islam in the northern province. In response to that letter that was signed by 22 countries, China then got 37 countries to sign a letter defending Chinese policy rather than criticizing it. Unfortunately, most Muslim countries signed onto the 37 letters. Most Muslim countries were among the 37 that signed the letter defending China instead of criticizing China. The text of the letter is as follows. This is a letter defending China, signed by the Muslim countries. We, the co-signatories to this letter, reiterate that the work of the United Nations Human Rights Council should be conducted in an objective, transparent, non-selective, constructive, non-confrontational, and non-politicized manner, etc., etc., the typical diplomatic language. Then, where the rub is, we commend China's remarkable achievements in the field of human rights by adhering to the people-centered development philosophy and protecting and promoting human rights through development. Notice here, protecting and promoting human rights through development. So basically, they get their human rights when you develop them economically. The same logic that Israel wants to use with the Palestinians and Kushner wants to use with the Palestinians. If we give you money, that's good enough, shut up. Shut up. We also appreciate China's contributions to the international human rights cause. We take note that terrorism, separatism, and religious extremism has caused enormous damage to people of all ethnic groups in the Xinjiang, the northern province, which has seriously infringed upon human rights, including right to life, health, development. So it is the people of the province, the extremists in the province, that infringed upon human rights, not the Chinese government. Faced with the grave challenge of terrorism and extremism, China has undertaken a series of counterterrorism and de-radicalization measures in Xinjiang, including setting up vocational education and training systems. Now, safety and security has returned to Xinjiang, and fundamental human rights of people of all ethnic groups there are safeguarded. The past 3 consecutive years has seen not a single terrorist attack in Xinjiang, and people there enjoy a stronger sense of happiness, they mean fulfillment, but they mistyped it, security. Yeah. Or or maybe fully maintained security. I don't know, it's a typo. We note with appreciation that human rights are respected and protected in China in the process of counterterrorism and de-radicalization. We appreciate China's commitment to openness and transparency. China has invited a number of diplomats, international organizations, officials, and journalists in Yangon to witness the progress of human rights. What they saw and heard in Yangon completely contradicted what was reported in the media. We call on relevant countries to refrain from employing unfounded charges against China based on unconfirmed information before they visit Yangon. We urge the Human Rights Council, treaty bodies, and relevant special procedures mandate holders to conduct their work in an objective and impartial manner according to their mandate, etc., etc. So basically, 37 countries, among them most Muslim countries, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Egypt, were all among the people that signed the letter I just read. And if you read the letter and you understand diplomatic language, basically what it's saying is people there are getting their human rights through development. Second, China is to be commended for fighting a war against extremism and terrorism. And since there hasn't been a terrorist attack, and since China has succeeded in exterminating Muslim extremists, then we should commend China and all go home. Now, who uses the same logic to destroy their opponents and quash dissent? Saudi Arabia uses this logic. Saudi Arabian government, everyone that dissents against the Saudi government is a terrorist. Egypt uses it. The United Arab Emirates uses it. Bahrain uses it. This is the very same logic of every despot. Every despot, an oppressor, an autocrat. Syria, which also signed onto this letter, obviously, of course, they don't want China to be held responsible for its human rights abuses because they don't want to be held responsible for their own human rights abuses. They're allowing China to use the excuse of terrorism to snuff out Muslims because they want the right to use the excuse of fighting terrorism to do as they please against their own dissenters. SubhanAllah, Allah warned us, Allah told us that this is precisely what happens Allah told us that this is precisely what happens with despots. With despots and autocrats since early history. Note, for instance, the story of Moses when Moses confronts the Pharaoh in Egypt. Moses invites the Pharaoh to humble himself, stop demanding that people obey him blindly. The Pharaoh's philosophy is "Urikum ma ara," is you are allowed to believe only what I allow you to believe. Isn't this a perfect description of every despot? If you agree with the despot, you're a good person. If you disagree, if you criticize, you become evil to them. Notice the way Trump dealt with the Muslim and with the non-white women in Congress. He disagrees with them, he calls them evil and tells them to go back home. This exclusionary logic is embedded in the mind of every despot. This is what Sisi does in Egypt, what the Zayed does in the Emirat, what MBS does in Saudi. You are allowed to believe only what I allow you to believe. Don't listen to anyone else. So, how does Pharaoh, among his comments, respond to Moses? He says, ذروني أقتل موسى وليدعو ربه إني أخاف أن يبدل دينكم أو أن يظهر في الأرض الفساد. Pharaoh responds by saying, I want to kill Moses. Why do you want to kill Moses? Because I fear that Moses will, يبدل دينكم means to make you change your faith, your belief system, or that Moses will cause corruption on earth. In our modern language, what is that? That Moses will cause terrorist attacks. The Pharaoh tells Moses, or tells people about Moses, you know, I want to kill this guy. Why do you want to kill this guy? I want to kill this guy because he doesn't have the right belief system, which is my belief system as the Pharaoh, and because Moses is a terrorist and will commit terrorist attacks. Moses, by the way, responds to this. قال موسى إني عزت بربي وربكم من كل متكبر لا يؤمن بيوم الحساب. Moses' response to this is, you know, the truth of the matter is the Pharaoh is arrogant, high and mighty and oppressive, and I seek refuge in Allah. I know that a lot of Muslims felt a deep sense of betrayal when they saw most Muslim countries with the exception of Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia, a couple of others, which refused to sign either letter, either the letter of condemnation or the letter of approval and hypocrisy. But the vast majority of Muslim countries signed the letter defending the Chinese Holocaust policies against Muslims. And they did so, not only do they want the right to use the same logic that China uses against its own Muslim population, not only do they not want the scrutiny of the Human Rights Council, but for countries like Egypt and most African countries, they want Saudi and Emirati largesse. Simple as that. Even countries like Syria, which is a genocidal country, signs to defend a genocide. Look at the obscenity of that. A country like Burma, which is a genocidal country, signs to defend a genocide. Obscenity. And the excuse is China is fighting terrorism. Exactly like Pharaoh told Moses. Exactly like Pharaoh's attitude towards Moses. When I kill Moses, I am fighting terrorism, corruption on earth, which is the old formula for describing terrorism. The difference those who believed Moses, there are two groups. Those who believed Moses by rejecting the arrogant, high and mighty ruler and his logic. In other words, those who stood against power. And those who accepted the logic of the Pharaoh and stood with the high and mighty against the oppressed on earth. And what was the result? According to this narrative that is a moral lesson to us, whether historically, what happened historically is a separate question, and it doesn't interest me. What interests me is the moral lesson that is being conveyed to us. You have a choice. You can believe that the righteous doer is in fact an accused terrorist, but if you do, your fate is sealed. If you side with the oppressor and call, like the oppressor does, the disempowered terrorists, your fate is sealed as Pharaoh and his soldiers. Now this is critical because we go back to the concept of al-siratal Mustaqim. So many Muslims say, well, when we say ihdina al-siratal Mustaqim, we feel betrayed and we're confused. Why are you confused? You're confused because you woke up and discovered that these governments, which are a thorough product of a colonial process, are only interested in power and not interested in principles or morality? Yes, it's a shameful thing that the 22 countries defending Muslims are not Muslim. And that the countries that stand against Muslims are Muslim. But what does that tell you? It tells you that morality is supreme. It tells you that if you have to stand alone on the top of the mountain, upholding al-siratal Mustaqim, the straight path, so be it. It tells you that you don't have to be Muslim. You don't have to be Muslim to stand up to ethics. Who do you think in Allah's eyes has a higher status? The 22 countries that are not Muslim, that stand against genocide and Holocaust, or the 37 countries that are by name Muslim, but that defend a Holocaust? Who do you think Allah is pleased with more? You want to understand Sirat al-Mustaqim, reflect on this. But there are a couple other things I want to comment on, because they all fall within the same narrative. We look at just a sub-issue, but of no less importance. We know, when I say we know, means there is enormous amount of evidence that a country like the Emirat maintains secret prisons in Yemen. If you read the reports of the people who survived these prisons, the testimony of these people, it turns your hair white. Every person detained in these secret prisons reported being sexually violated and assaulted. The Emirati government, in its secret prisons, uses sexual violation as a means of domination and control. But we also know that last year it broke out that the Emirati government hired an Israeli ex-agent Abraham Golan and an ex-military American guy called Isaac Gilmore. Why did they hire the military? Golan, who's a very famous character, by the way, and Mother Day, or Mother Jones, or whatever the name of that, Mother Jones magazine wrote a whole spread on Golan, a very arrogant, cocky, ex-military Israeli guy. And the UAE, this government, hired him to go around killing leaders from the Islah movement. The Islah movement is an Islamic movement that the Emirat believes is Ikhwani, and so they want to terminate not its preachers, not its military fighters or anything like that. There's a member of the Islah movement who won a Nobel Peace Prize, by the way. So this is an entirely legitimate political movement, but the Emirat, for whatever reason, considers it a danger in the same way they consider care a danger, they consider Isna a danger, anything Islamic is a danger. So they got this Israeli military guy, Golan, and other ex-American military to go around killing Islamic imams in Yemen. Recently, I've been reading these files about Hani bin Barak. Hani bin Barak is a guy that was bought by the Emirates that went around murdering Yemeni intellectuals and Yemeni preachers on behalf of the Emirat. He was paid by the Emirat, armed by the Emirat, got his instructions from the Emirat, and the Emirat would give him a hit list, and he would go around murdering imams. Among the files I was going through, just to tell you, give you a sense of the incredible horrendousness of this. There was an imam called al-Rawi. Al-Rawi was a mosque preacher. So the Bin Barak group gets its marching orders to murder al-Rawi. They want to kill al-Rawi. Al-Rawi is giving a khutbah after Jum'ah, and the khutbah is about what? About how assassinations and suicide bombings are haram in Islam. His khutbah is about how in Islam it is haram to kill people. So the Bin Barak people, what do? They want to get to Rawi, the guy that Emirat wants dead. They go to him and they say, brother, we know a friend who has stopped praying. Can you please come to counsel our friend so that that friend will pray again? Rawi says, okay, well, have your friend come. They bring a guy who pretends to be the Muslim who doesn't want to pray. Rawi sits there and gives him advice, and the man says, oh, subhanallah, I've seen the light. Thank you, Rawi, you're so great. They say, we want to thank you, brother Rawi. You guided our friend to Salah. Let's take you out to dinner. Rawi says, no need. They say, no, we owe you a big favor. Let's take you out to dinner. They go out to dinner, they eat dinner. Driving back to Rawi's home, they shoot him in the head and dump his body outside the car, take his papers, and put them in a pile and burn them. Look at the incredible ugliness. This is just one of the assassinations. Why am I saying this? This is the same Emirat that goes around talking about tolerance, that created a ministry of tolerance. Tolerance for the Emirat is tolerance towards non-Muslims, not towards fellow Muslims. Tolerance in the Emirat is tolerance towards Jews and Christians, not fellow Muslims. Why? What is their excuse in killing a Rawi and in killing the Islah people? They're terrorists. Exactly like Pharaoh told Moses. Exactly. And then we see some prominent Muslim figures work for the Emirat, praise the tolerance of the Emirat. The Emirat who is responsible for a genocide in Yemen. The Emirat that signed on to defending a Holocaust in China. The Emirat that has murdered tens and tens of imams, killed thousands of civilians. The Emirat that tortures and rapes men in secret prisons in Yemen, and then you find people like Bin Bayya say, "Oh, Bin Zayed, you are the light of Islam. You are the gift to Islam. Khasi'tum." May Allah, what do I say? What do I say about them? They are not on the al-siratal Mustaqim. This is not the al-siratal Mustaqim. Lying to an imam and telling him, come, preach to someone so they can pray, and the imam trusting you, and then you put a bullet in their head is not al-siratal Mustaqim. Raping people in prison is not al-siratal Mustaqim. Defending the genocide in China is not al-siratal Mustaqim. It is not al-siratal Mustaqim. How more clear can it be? إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي وادعوا الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الميامين وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. When Allah describes to us the nature of the Pharaohs, the corrupt, Allah tells us what? الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد. Those who have spread despotism on earth and caused suffering. Doesn't this apply to Sisi? Doesn't this apply to MBS? Doesn't this apply to MBZ? How dare you serve in MBZ's government in any capacity and say, oh, they stand for tolerance? How dare you? How dare you defend Sisi's government? After what Muslim countries did with China, how dare any Muslim brag about any relationship with these criminal governments? How dare you? Let me tell you a funny story. Then we'll end with this. You know that for many years, one of the rainmakers for Saudi brings in tons of money, is selling visas for Hajj and Umrah. Getting a visa to do Hajj or Umrah is a highly competitive process, and Saudi Arabia has doubled the prices and tripled the prices for a Umrah visa, and the poorest people in Egypt will save for their entire life to go buy, and it is a major source of income for Saudi. Hajj and Umrah for Saudi is big business. Very big business. But the visas are very expensive for the vast majority of Muslims in underdeveloped countries. And I know tons of Egyptians, for instance, who saved and saved and saved and saved for their life just to get the visa, pay the fee, and if they're lucky enough to get a Hajj or Umrah visa. Saudi MBS, when he decided that he wants Mariah Carey and all the stuff, there was a recent pop group in Jeddah I watched on YouTube, and the song went sexy, 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 and you see all these muhajjabat popping up and down with sexy, sexy, sexy in Jeddah, in Hijaz. I want to know if the Prophet ﷺ came today and saw this happening in Hijaz, what would he say? Would he join in the song Sexy, Sexy, Sexy? Would the Prophet ﷺ join in Sexy, Sexy, Sexy? Which of the companions would join? These people sat there for decades telling it's the Sunnah of the Prophet brother, the Sunnah of the Prophet brother, the Sunnah of the Prophet brother. Every time you open your mouth about anything, now they are jumping with Sexy, Sexy, Sexy in the Hijaz. The Hijaz should be like the Papal State after World War II, with a special status and a special diplomatic representation in the UN. You can't open a mosque in the Hijaz. You can't have a concert. You can't open a mosque in Rome, the Papal State. You can't. Because the Catholic Church controls the Papal State. And no other religion can be represented in the Papal State. You can't have a concert in the Papal State because you have to get permission from the Catholic Church. Why isn't the Hijaz in the same status? Don't we Muslims have a right not to watch Sexy, Sexy, Sexy in our holy land? Or is it that Al Saud stole that and it became their own private property? Well, anyway, so Saudi creates for the Sexy, Sexy, Sexy song a special visa called the Visa al-Fa'aliyah. Much cheaper than Hajj and Umrah. You go and you buy this visa and you go attend the concerts and the songs and dances and swing with Sexy, Sexy, Sexy. So Muslims, what did Muslims start doing? Poor Muslims. They started buying Visa al-Fa'aliyah, going to Saudi, but not attending the Sexy, Sexy, Sexy conference, instead doing Umrah. Some of them would stay long until Hajj and do Hajj. Recently, the Saudi government figured it out. Said, no, we want to give you cheap visas for you to come to Sexy, 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 not do Umrah and Hajj. What is this? We want you to give you a visa to Pharoah so you can dance with Mariah Carey and watch the jiggling and bobbing, but we don't want you to go to Umrah and Hajj. So recently, about 30 Egyptians who had bought visa to Pharoah, and these naughty Egyptians were planning to go to Umrah instead of the dance parties, the Saudi government instructed the Egyptian government to turn them all around. Of course, the Saudi government refused to reimburse them, but they were not allowed to fly to Saudi Arabia. Look at the irony and the comedy of our age. Is this al-siratal Mustaqim? Now, you see, so what is your point? My point is, forget the Muslim world. We owe our fellow Muslim populations, not governments, an ethical bond. We owe them the duty, the obligation to pressure our government, to pursue more just and fair policies in the Muslim world. Among the countries that did not sign the letter condemning China's genocidal policies against Muslims was the U.S. In 2016, the U.S. did sign a letter against China. Today, the U.S. refused to sign because Trump doesn't want to hold China responsible for the Holocaust against Muslims. This should be the first priority for Muslims. Our government is our responsibility, no one else. But when it comes to your Islam, to al-siratal Mustaqim, forget Saudi, forget Egypt, forget the United Arab Emirates. Don't even brag about going to these corrupt governments and earning an honorary position with them, being in their Fatwa Council, or being in their Azhar institution, or being in their whatever. Rely on yourself and on our own native sources among Muslims in the West. We have to develop our own independent institutions. that rely on studying the Quran, the history of the divine legacy as represented by the Sunnah, and that investigates our own intuitive conscience and investigates our own intellectual products. If you want the al-siratal Mustaqim, it is there, apparent, obvious. Al-siratal Mustaqim is not in the sexy songs in Jeddah. It is not in the visat al-fa'aliyah. It is not in the disgusting policies towards China and Iran. It is not in the massacres committed against civilians and the torment and torture and it is not in all of this ugliness. Your Islam should shine within for the beauty and truth and the purity it is. Remember, these are like the Pharaohs who accused Moses of being a terrorist. قولوا قولي هذا وادعوا الله فأمنوا يستجب لكم اللهم اعف عنا وارحمنا يا رب واهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا وانصر الإسلام وأعز المسلمين يا رب العالمين. Allah, forgive our sins, guide us to a better path, allow us to see what is right and straight for what it is, and enlighten our intellects and heart and our spirits and consciousness so that we may stand on the side of truth, justice, fairness, and beauty. Wa aqim as-salat.